Somewhere over eastern Ukraine, 112 kilometers northeast of Dnipro, a Ukrainian signals operator is watching a radar screen light up like a pinball machine. 18 blips, then 30, then 54, then within 60 seconds, 128. They are Shahed 136 attack drones, Iranian-designed, Russian-launched, crawling toward Ukrainian cities at 185 kilometers per hour. Each one carries a 40-kilogram warhead. Each one costs Russia approximately $35,000 to manufacture, and in the next 4 hours, the story of how Ukraine tries to stop all 128 of them using technology that didn't exist 18 months ago, built in secret workshops scattered across the country, operated by soldiers who learned to fly interceptor drones on tablets, will tell you everything you need to know about where this war is going. But here is the thing nobody is saying out loud this morning. There is a man in a control room right now, not in Ukraine, not in Russia, watching this same attack unfold on a different screen entirely, and what he decides to do in the next 72 hours will determine whether the guns finally go quiet or whether the largest air war in Europe since World War II escalates into something nobody in Washington, Brussels, or Moscow is prepared for. We will get to him. But first, the drones. Signal number 1. The attack on the night of May 21st to May 22nd, 2026, began at 0:30 local time. The Ukrainian Air Force Command confirmed it on Facebook within hours. 128 Shahed-type loitering munitions, plus an Iskander ballistic missile fired from the Taganrog region of Russia. The drones came from 4 directions simultaneously: Milahovo, Kursk, Primorsko-Akhtarsk in southern Russia, and from Cape Shauda in Russian-occupied Crimea. 4 vectors. Time to stretch Ukrainian air defense to its absolute limit. This is not improvisation, this is doctrine. Russia has been refining this multi-axis swarm approach for the better part of 18 months, deliberately designed to force Ukrainian radar operators to make impossible choices about which threats to prioritize. The result, as of 11 a.m. Kiev time on May 22nd, Ukrainian air defenses neutralized 112 of the 128 drones. 74 were shot down by what the Ukrainian military calls fire weapons, meaning interceptor drones, anti-aircraft guns, and shoulder-fired missiles. 38 more were suppressed or lost by electronic warfare, simply knocked off course, their GPS receivers jammed, their engines still running but pointing at empty fields. The remaining 16 got through. Dnipropetrovsk, Donetsk, Kharkiv, and Mykolaiv oblasts all reported damage. The Ukrainian General Staff also confirmed that on this same day, across the entire front, 144 separate combat engagements took place, and Russian forces used 492 attack drones of various types against Ukrainian positions, not just the 128 in this one mass strike, but an additional 2,364 smaller tactical drones along 200 kilometers of active front line. That number, 2,492, is the number you need to hold in your head, because that is the scale of the problem Ukraine is solving in real time. Here's what nobody is telling you about that 87.5% intercept rate. 2 years ago, a 128 drone attack would have devastated Ukrainian air defense reserves. A single Patriot PAC-3 interceptor missile cost $3.80 million. A NASAMS AIM-9X missile cost just over $1 million. You fire 3 or 4 of those at a single $35,000 Shahed drone, and Russia is winning the economic war without firing a single artillery shell. The Kremlin understood this arithmetic before Kiev did. The mass drone campaign was never purely about destruction. It was about bankruptcy. Exhaust the missile stocks, drain the Western resupply pipeline, force Europe to choose between defending its own stockpiles and feeding Ukraine's insatiable air defense demands. That was the plan. And it was working, until the sting. At a location in Ukraine that cannot be disclosed, a company called Wild Hornets, a Ukrainian nonprofit, of all things, began manufacturing a quadcopter drone specifically designed to chase and destroy Shaheds in flight. They called it the Sting. It weighs a few kilograms. It costs between $1,300 and $2,200 per unit. It can reach speeds over 160 kilometers per hour. It operates at altitudes up to 3,000 meters. And since its first successful combat interception roughly a year ago, interceptors like the Sting have taken out approximately 4,000 Shahed-type drones. One interceptor. costing the price of a used motorcycle, destroying a weapon that cost $35,000 to manufacture. The economics have been flipped upside down. And Russia's generals in Moscow did not see it coming fast enough. But here's the catch, and this is the first pivot you need to hear. Ukraine is not winning the air war. Not yet. Not completely. Because for every Shahed that costs $35,000, Russia manufactures hundreds domestically, Russian-produced versions called Garin 2, built inside factories that Western sanctions have failed to fully shut down, using components that keep flowing through third-party suppliers in Central Asia and the Gulf. On the night of May 31st to June 1st, 2025, less than 12 months ago, Russia launched a record 479 aerial weapons in a single night. 479. Ukraine shot down 385 of them. 87 got through. That was before the Sting program scaled. It was before Ukraine began manufacturing nearly 1,000 interceptor drones per day. It was before the Ukrainian National Security and Defense Council announced that interceptor drone production had grown eightfold in a single year. By December 2025 and into January 2026, Frontline units were receiving an average of 1,500 interceptor drones per day. In March 2026 alone, Ukrainian interceptor drones flew approximately 6,300 combat sorties and destroyed more than 33,000 enemy drones, twice the number destroyed in February. Ukraine's defense minister Mikhailo Fedorov stated the goal publicly: detect all aerial threats in real time and intercept at least 95% of incoming missiles and drones. In February 2026, drones accounted for more than 70% of all Shahed shootdowns over Kiev. Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky confirmed it. 1 in every 3 Russian aerial targets destroyed over Ukraine is now brought down not by a missile or a gun, but by an interceptor drone that costs less than a used car. That is a revolution in warfare, not metaphorical, literal. Now meet the Zerov-8. This is the machine nobody outside Ukrainian defense circles was talking about 3 months ago. And now military analysts in Washington, Berlin, and Seoul are studying it with the urgency of people who realize they missed something important. Built by a company called the Fourth Law, the Zerov-8 is a vertical takeoff and landing interceptor that transitions to horizontal flight mid-air, essentially behaving like both a helicopter and a fixed-wing aircraft in the same mission. Its maximum speed is 326 kilometers per hour. Its operational radius is 20 kilometers. But its core feature, the feature that makes generals nervous, is an AI-based detection and tracking module that identifies Shaheds autonomously, locks onto them without a human in the loop during the terminal phase, and guides itself into the target. The Fourth Law was manufacturing 100 Zerov-8 units per day as of January 2026 at a unit price of approximately $2,300. Meanwhile, Ukraine and the United Kingdom were moving toward joint production of 1,000 Octopus interceptor drones, another variant in this rapidly expanding ecosystem of cheap, lethal, autonomous air defenders. Signal number 2. Here is the geopolitical domino that nobody in the financial press has properly calculated. If Ukraine's interceptor drone program fully matures, if the 95% interception rate becomes reliable across all threat types, not just Shaheds, but cruise missiles and eventually ballistic missiles, the economic argument that Russia has been using to sustain this war at the political level inside the Kremlin begins to collapse. The drone swarm was supposed to be Russia's cheap path to breaking Ukrainian civilian morale, forcing Kiev to the table on Moscow's terms. If that tool stops working, Putin's negotiating position, already under extraordinary pressure from a Trump White House that wants this war over before the 2026 midterms, weakens dramatically. And a weakened Putin at the negotiating table is a Putin who may reach for more dangerous tools. That is the chain reaction. That is the domino. On May 19, 2026, 3 days ago, President Trump spent 2 hours on the phone with Vladimir Putin. What came out of that call was not reassuring. Putin told Trump he was willing to discuss what he called a memorandum regarding a potential future peace treaty. Translation: not a ceasefire, not now. A document about a document. A framework about a framework. Trump posted on Truth Social afterwards saying Russia and Ukraine would immediately start negotiations toward a ceasefire. Putin said no such thing. Zelensky, for his part, dismissed Moscow's simultaneous demand that Ukraine withdraw its troops from all 4 occupied oblasts, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson, as a non-starter. Ukraine's position remains unchanged. Full, unconditional ceasefire first, then negotiations. Russia's position remains unchanged. Eliminate the root causes of the war first, which means, in practical terms, Ukraine agreeing to permanent neutrality, abandoning NATO aspirations, and accepting Russia's territorial facts on the ground before a single Russian soldier retreats. These two positions are not close. They are not trending closer. And the front line is still bleeding on both sides at rates that would have shocked Western capitals 2 years ago. As of May 21, 2026, Russia's total combat losses in the war since February 24, 2022, reached approximately 1,352,980 personnel, including 910 losses in a single day. Russian forces carried out 839 separate attacks on 53 settlements in the Zaporizhia region alone in the previous 24-hour period. The 2026 Ukrainian counteroffensive, launched in February from positions along the Vovcha River in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, has achieved localized gains. Ukrainian air assault forces pushed into the village of Vidradne, but nothing approaching the strategic breakthrough that would shift the overall dynamic. Here's what nobody is telling you about the peace talks. There is a third party in the room, not a country, not a diplomat, an economic calculation. The Ukrainian minerals deal, ratified by Ukraine's parliament just this month, gives Washington a direct financial stake in Ukrainian sovereignty. American companies now have preferential access to Ukraine's rare earth deposits, its titanium reserves, its lithium fields. If Ukraine collapses to Russian terms, those contracts evaporate. That is now a domestic American economic interest, not just a foreign policy abstraction. And that changes the math in the White House in ways that even the most ardent Trump isolationists have not fully processed. The man in the control room we mentioned at the top, he is connected to that calculation. He is watching the drone intercept numbers with the same spreadsheet open that his colleagues are using to model mineral extraction timelines. We will get to him. But first, the third layer of this air war that the morning headlines are missing entirely, the Dark Node unit. This is one of the most extraordinary military innovations of this war, and it has received almost no attention in the Western press. Fighters from the Dark Node unit, as part of the 412th Nemesis Regiment of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, have been systematically hunting and destroying Russian Shahed UAVs using only interceptor drones, no missiles, no anti-aircraft guns, no radar-guided systems. They've destroyed 100 Russian attack UAVs, including 76 Shaheds and 24 Geran-2 variants. The Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces described this as the first instance in modern warfare where long-range attack drones are being systematically intercepted by other drones in organized combat operations. The cost comparison is staggering. An air defense missile can cost up to $1 million. A Dark Node interceptor costs approximately $5,000. The unit has been scaling rapidly, and the intercept numbers grew by 40 successful engagements in just the last 2 weeks of their most recent reporting period. And then, in April 2026, Ukraine crossed another threshold. The 412th Brigade Nemesis, the same regiment that houses Dark Node, pulled off something that has never been done before in the history of aerial warfare. A Ukrainian unmanned surface vessel, operating at sea, launched a Sting interceptor drone that successfully destroyed a Russian Shahed in flight. Sea-launched drone interceptor kills airborne attack drone over open water. The 412th Nemesis. Sam Bendet, an unmanned systems expert at the Center for Naval Analyses in Washington, called it clearly. This capability adds another protection layer for Ukrainians against incoming Russian long-range drones. When integrated with the rest of the defensive systems, it makes Shaheds even more vulnerable. Russia, according to Bendet, has not achieved anything remotely similar. Here's the catch. Pivot number 2. And this one matters more than anything else in this script. The interceptor revolution is solving the Shahed problem. It is not solving the Iskander problem, or the Ka-101 cruise missile problem, or most critically, the Kinzhal hypersonic missile problem. The same financial analysis that shows interceptors winning the drone war shows Ukraine hemorrhaging precious Patriot and NASAMS missiles against Russia's higher-end weapons. A Patriot PAC-3 costs $3.80 million. Global production of Patriot interceptors currently stands at roughly 850 per year worldwide, projected to reach only 1,130 by 2027. European NATO countries receive perhaps 400 to 500 of those annually, meaning if Russia escalates to sustained ballistic missile campaigns, the stockpile math turns brutal again. The Iris-T and NASAMS have shown near 100% effectiveness against Russian cruise missiles in Ukraine. Diehl Defense is ramping Iris-T SL production toward 800 to 1,000 interceptors per year in 2026. It is not enough. Russia can produce ballistic and cruise missiles faster than the Western alliance can replenish the interceptors needed to stop them. This is not speculation. This is what defense analysts at CEPA, the Center for European Policy Analysis, stated explicitly in April 2026. Demand for Patriot interceptors is greater than ever, which brings us back to May 22nd, 2026, and to the man in the control room. He is not a soldier. He is not a diplomat. He is a supply chain director at a defense contractor. His company has just received an emergency contract modification, classified but known within the corridors of the Pentagon, to accelerate delivery of 200 additional Patriot PAC-3 MSE interceptors to Ukraine by Q3 of this year. 200 missiles, each one worth $3.80 million. The contract modification is worth $760 million. It was approved in the second week of May 2026, quietly, without a press conference, without a congressional hearing, because it was funded under emergency drawdown authority. He is watching the May 2nd drone attack in real time because his team needs to know whether the interceptor drones are working well enough that they can slow the Patriot shipment, or whether the ballistic missile threat is intensifying in ways that require those 200 Patriot rounds to arrive before autumn. What he is seeing on his screen as of 11 a.m. on May 22nd is genuinely ambiguous. The Shaheds, largely handled, 112 out of 128. The interceptor drones and electronic warfare systems performing well above their 2024 baseline. But the Iskander-Men that was fired from Taganrog this morning, that one targeted a specific military installation in Sumy Oblast. That single ballistic missile traveling at Mach 6 to 8 was not stopped by a $2,300 interceptor drone. It was stopped or not stopped by the one Patriot battery in range, and the status of that engagement has not been released in public reporting. That gap between what the cheap drones can do and what the expensive missiles can do is the actual front line of this war right now, not the trenches in Donetsk. Not the Pokrov salient, where Russian troops launched 41 assaults in a single day on the front sector bearing that city's name. The real front line is economic. It is the cost per kill calculation being run simultaneously in Kiev, Moscow, Washington, and Brussels. And it is this calculation, not the battlefield map, that will determine whether there is a peace agreement in the next 60 days, or whether this war enters an entirely new and more dangerous phase. Let's talk about that peace agreement. Because the gap between where diplomacy is and where it needs to be is almost as wide as the gap between Shahed costs and Patriot costs. In early May, Trump announced a 3-day ceasefire, May 9th, 10th, and 11th, in the war between Russia and Ukraine. Zelensky confirmed it. The ceasefire formally began on May 8th. In the first 24 hours alone, Ukrainian forces recorded 117 combat clashes across the front line. Russian troops launched 41 assaults in the Pokrovsk sector alone. Ukraine reported that Russia violated the ceasefire 469 times. Russia claimed Ukraine violated it too. The ceasefire in practical terms lasted approximately as long as it took Vladimir Putin to sign the announcement. This is not the first time. In April 2026, a 32-hour Orthodox Easter truce was declared. It lasted on paper. In reality, both sides continued military operations. Russia attacked with drones during the announced ceasefire window. 6 Ukrainian servicemen were killed in a Russian missile strike on a firing range in Sumy Oblast on May 20th, 2 days ago. The Kremlin keeps announcing truces, Russia keeps violating them, and each violation erodes the credibility of the next announcement, making genuine diplomacy harder to initiate, because Kyiv's position becomes, how do we negotiate a peace framework with a party that cannot maintain a 32-hour ceasefire? But here is the third pivot, the one that changes everything. The latest sticking point in peace negotiations is not Crimea. It is not even the broader territorial question of Donetsk and Luhansk. The specific breaking point right now, as reported by multiple diplomatic sources, is the Donetsk region itself, around 3/4 of which Russia controls. Moscow has demanded that Kyiv withdraw its troops from the portions of Donetsk that Russia has not yet captured. Not the parts Russia holds, the parts Ukraine still controls. Russia is demanding pre-surrender of territory it has not won militarily as a precondition for peace talks. Ukraine has refused. Zelensky has stated unequivocally that he will not cede territory that is still under Ukrainian control. A majority of Ukrainians polled just this month say they are unwilling to trade territory or Ukraine's western path for peace. The U.S. proposal floated in April 2026 was startling in its specificity. Legal recognition by Washington of Russian control over Crimea, de facto U.S. recognition of Russian control of Luhansk and large parts of Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, and Kherson. Ukraine would regain territory in Kharkiv. Ukraine would get administrative control, not sovereignty, over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, with U.S. management of the facility. Steve Witkoff and Secretary of State Marco Rubio were dispatched to represent Washington in the direct talks that followed. Trump himself did not attend. Whether these U.S. proposals are still on the table, modified, or effectively dead, is one of the central unanswered questions of this week's diplomacy. And here is what is happening in the war's hidden economy while the diplomats maneuver. Russia spent the last year launching drone swarms partly to exhaust Ukrainian missile stocks and partly to terrorize Ukrainian civilian populations into demanding their government accept any peace terms offered. It was a strategy with a timeline attached. Exhaust Ukraine before the interceptor drone program could mature. That timeline has now expired. Ukraine's interceptor drone industry has scaled faster than Russian military planners expected. Defense Minister Denys Shmyhal signed 4 contracts for drone intercept technology worth over $72 million in a single procurement round. The Defense Procurement Agency has contracts for tens of thousands of interceptor drones now in mass production. Russia's bet that the economic pain of intercepting cheap drones with expensive missiles would break Ukrainian resolve has been undermined by a $2 300 quadcopter built in a workshop that would look, to an outside observer, like a mid-sized electronics repair facility. The 412th Nemesis Regiment, the Dark Node Unit, Wild Hornets, a non-profit, the Fourth Law, a startup. These are not the actors you expected to be deciding the outcome of the largest land war in Europe since 1945. But here they are, deciding it. Signal number 3. The war on the front lines continues while all of this plays out in the air above. As of May 22, 2026, the 2026 Ukrainian counteroffensive is technically still active. Ukrainian Air Assault Forces, the 82nd Air Assault Brigade, the 95th Air Assault Brigade, the 132nd Air Assault Reconnaissance Battalion, are holding the Oleksandrivka front in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, fighting against Russian units including the 36th and 37th Motorized Rifle Brigades and the 14th Spetsnaz Brigade. Progress is measured in hundreds of meters. Ukrainian forces hold Vyrodne. Russian forces hold the larger strategic picture. Neither side is close to collapse. Neither side is close to breakthrough. The front is consuming approximately 910 Russian personnel per day, killed, captured, or seriously wounded, according to Ukrainian military tallies, which Western analysts assess as broadly consistent with satellite imagery and intercepted communications, even if the precise numbers remain uncertain. Commander Oleksandr Syrsky is managing this front on the Ukrainian side. General Valery Gerasimov is managing it for Russia. Both men have been fighting this war for over 4 years. Neither one is showing any sign of requesting an exit ramp. The only question that matters in the next 72 hours, is whether the diplomatic track and the military track can be brought into alignment. Whether the man in the control room watching his Patriot delivery timeline, the signals operator watching 128 drone blips expand on his radar screen, the Dark Node pilot launching his $5,000 interceptor toward a $35,000 Shahed, and the diplomats in whatever unmarked building in Istanbul or Riyadh is hosting back-channel communications this week, whether all of those threads converge on a single moment of decision. Because here is the binary. Here is the only binary that matters. In the next 24 to 72 hours, one of 2 things happens. Either the diplomatic back channel that was quietly active last week, the channel that the Kremlin spokesman publicly denied exists, the channel that involves neither Witkoff nor Rubio directly, but a European intermediary whose government has asked not to be named in any press reporting. Either that channel produces a specific, concrete, verifiable proposal for a monitored ceasefire with real enforcement mechanisms, real guarantees, and a real timeline. Or it doesn't. If it does, there is a path, narrow, treacherous, requiring both Putin and Zelensky to sell their own populations on terms that neither population currently supports, but a path. If it doesn't, if the back channel goes silent, if the May 22nd drone attack is followed by a May 23rd attack of equal or greater scale, if the Iskander fired from Taganrog this morning is followed by a Kinzhal fired at Kiev next week, then the calculation in Washington shifts. Then the 200 Patriot missiles sitting in a warehouse in a state that cannot be named arrive in Ukraine not as a negotiating lubricant, but as a war-fighting necessity. Then the 95% intercept rate that Ukraine's defense minister promised becomes not an aspiration, but a survival requirement. Then the Zerov-8 say and the stings in the dark nodes multiply again to 2,000 per day, to 3,000 per day, because there is no ceiling on this production curve as long as the war continues. And then the dominoes. If the front doesn't freeze, Russia's economy, already strained under the weight of financing a $300 billion per year war machine, continues to erode. The ruble, the oil revenues, the shadow fleet keeping Russian petroleum moving through sanctions, all of it becomes more precarious, not less. With every month, the war continues past the point where Moscow expected to have broken Ukrainian will, and a cornered Kremlin is more dangerous than a Kremlin with options. That is not speculation. That is the assessment of every serious Russia analyst from Washington to Warsaw. Peace or war, deal or escalation. A breakthrough that nobody on May 22nd, 2026 believes is possible, or a descent into a phase of this conflict that will make the last 4 years look, in retrospect, like the quiet part. The radar screen in eastern Ukraine is clearing. The 112 intercepted drones are falling across empty fields and forest lines from Donetsk to Dnipropetrovsk. The Sting pilots are filing their after-action reports. The Patriot battery operators are logging their missile expenditure, and somewhere a back channel is either humming or silent. We will know which one in 72 hours.